You hear it, and your stomach tightens. What if the story you think you know is only the version that survived? But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. What if the most dangerous secrets aren't hidden in palace vaults or sealed court documents, but buried inside family grudges that finally crack under pressure? And what if the person speaking now is the one voice that was never supposed to speak at all? Because minutes ago, not years ago, not during some forgotten tabloid cycle, a brother did something that instantly reignited one of the most explosive rumors surrounding Meghan Markle. And whether you believe him or not may not even be the point. The question is why now? And what that timing tells us. Stay with me, because this isn't just about a rumor. It's about narrative control, silence, power, and what happens when someone who was erased from the story decides to rewrite it. Let's slow this down. For years, Meghan Markle's public image has been one of precision. Carefully chosen words, carefully framed memories, carefully edited pain. Every interview feels polished. Every anecdote lands exactly where it's supposed to. And to be fair, that's not unusual. Every celebrity does it. Every public figure shapes their origin story. But here's the uncomfortable truth most people don't like to admit. The cleaner the story, the more people start wondering what was scrubbed out. Now add one volatile ingredient to that equation. Family. Not chosen family. Not found family. Blood. Because family remembers the parts you don't want remembered. The messy chapters. The awkward transitions. The versions of you that existed before the brand did. And when family feels abandoned, erased, or rewritten out of the narrative completely, resentment doesn't fade. It ferments. Which brings us to the man at the center of this latest firestorm. Meghan Markle's brother. A name most people barely recognize. A face rarely shown. A voice almost never heard in full. Until now. And when he spoke, he didn't whisper. He didn't hedge. He didn't tease. He dropped a phrase that detonated across social media, comment sections, and group chats within minutes. Two words that carry weight far heavier than they should. Two words loaded with implication, rumor, judgment, and decades of tabloid obsession. Yacht girl. Let's be very clear about something before we go any further. This video is not here to declare that phrase true. It's not here to confirm, prove, or endorse any allegation. That matters. What we're examining is not proof, but motive. Not facts, but timing. Not certainty, but contradiction. Because sometimes the most revealing thing isn't whether an accusation is true. It's why it was made. And why it was made now. Think about it. Why would a brother stay silent for years? And then suddenly speak up at a moment when Meghan's public narrative is already under intense scrutiny? Why choose language that he knows will ignite outrage? Why say just enough to cause chaos, but not enough to close the case? Ask yourself this. If this was just about revenge, why wait so long? If this was about truth, why release it this way? And if this was about attention, why frame it so carefully that it invites investigation instead of spectacle? These questions matter more than the allegation itself. Because in modern media, the truth rarely explodes out of nowhere. It leaks. It seeps. It's hinted at, denied, reshaped, then resurfaced again when the moment is right. And make no mistake, this moment is right. Public sympathy is fractured. The audience is divided. Fatigue has set in. People are no longer consuming narratives passively. They're questioning them. Which is exactly when suppressed voices feel brave enough to speak. Or desperate enough, depending on how you see it. Now here's where things get uncomfortable. Meghan Markle has spoken extensively about her past, about her struggles, about her ambition, about her identity, about the barriers she faced. And again, none of that is invalidated by a family member disagreeing. But there is a glaring absence in her story. Her siblings. They are barely footnotes. Shadows at the edge of the frame. Mentioned only when necessary, never centered, never given agency. And that omission is striking because in almost every other area, Meghan emphasizes personal connection, family, belonging, roots. So why not here? What happened behind closed doors that made cutting ties feel safer than maintaining them? And why does her brother believe that the world only knows the polished version of events? This is where the story stops being about yachts or rumors or scandal and starts becoming something far more human. Betrayal. Imagine watching someone you grew up with rewrite the shared past as if you never existed. Imagine seeing interviews where your childhood home is described, but your presence in it is erased. Imagine knowing details that don't fit the narrative and being told, directly or indirectly, that your silence is expected. For years, he stayed quiet, or at least relatively quiet, until he didn't. And when he broke that silence, he didn't release a long manifesto. He didn't present a stack of documents. He didn't offer proof. He offered implication. That's what makes this so powerful and so dangerous, because implication invites interpretation. It invites projection. It invites the audience to fill in the blanks themselves. And people always fill blanks with their worst assumptions, especially when the media ecosystem rewards outrage. But here's the twist that many people missed. The most shocking part of what he said wasn't the phrase itself. It was the detail that followed. A small detail, easy to overlook, almost casually dropped. A detail about timing, about access, about circles Meghan was allegedly moving in before the world knew her name. A detail that, if true, would force a reevaluation of how her rise really happened. Not because it proves wrongdoing, but because it challenges the simplicity of the story we've been told. And simple stories are comforting. Complex ones are threatening. That's why this allegation refuses to die every time it resurfaces. Not because it's proven, but because it exists in the gaps between what's said and what's avoided, between what's celebrated and what's never addressed. And let's talk about the media for a moment. Because if this was nonsense, you'd expect swift dismissal, clear denials, firm corrections. But instead, we get something else entirely. Silence, cautious language, articles that reference the claim without examining it, segments that hint without explaining. Why? Is it legal risk? Is it fear of backlash? Or is it because touching this story means stepping into a gray zone no one wants to own? When stories are false, they're usually crushed quickly. When stories are true, they're investigated. But when stories are inconvenient, they're often ignored. And ignoring something doesn't make it go away. It lets it grow, especially when the source is family. Because family accusations hit differently. They carry emotional weight that strangers don't. They feel personal, messy, unresolved. And audiences sense that. That's why people can't look away from this. Not because they want scandal, but because they want coherence. They want the pieces to fit. And right now, they don't. So let me ask you directly. Do you think this brother is telling the truth? Or do you think he's lashing out after years of feeling discarded? Or could it be something far more complicated than either? Because here's the thing no one wants to admit. All three could be true at once. He could be hurt. He could be biased. And he could still know things the public doesn't. That's what makes this story so volatile. And we're just getting started. Because before we even touch the allegation itself, before we dissect that controversial phrase, before we examine the so-called shocking detail, we need to understand one critical thing. Who this brother really is. What his relationship with Meghan actually looked like before the fame. And why he believes the world has been shown a version of her that doesn't tell the whole story. Because once you understand that, what comes next will hit very differently. And trust me, you've heard the stories. You've seen the headlines. You've read the memoirs, the interviews, the Instagram posts. Meghan Markle, public figure, duchess, Hollywood actress, philanthropist, cultural icon. But there's a part of her story that almost nobody talks about. A chapter that exists in shadows. A presence that has been erased from the narrative she carefully curated for decades. That chapter has a name, her brother. The man who knows Meghan better than anyone outside of her immediate childhood circle. The man whose memory, according to him, has been scrubbed, ignored, and rewritten in public records, articles, and interviews. And yet, for all his obscurity, his presence, or absence, shapes the story we've come to accept about Meghan Markle in ways few people realize. Let's set the stage. Siblings share a bond unlike any other. A bond that is at once tender, volatile, and unshakably formative. Childhood memories are intertwined, shared secrets held in the delicate architecture of family. And then, one day, for reasons that can range from betrayal to circumstance, that bond is broken. The person who was once closest becomes the person who was most painfully erased. That is the story of Meghan and her brother. Now, before you jump to conclusions, understand this. This is not about villainizing anyone. The brother is not the hero of this story, and Meghan is not necessarily the villain. This is about context, nuance, and the intricate dynamics of family relationships. It is about what happens when one sibling feels ignored, silenced, or pushed to the margins while the other ascends to global prominence. Meghan Markle's public story, in her words and in the words of the media, is one of ambition and perseverance. She is often portrayed as the outsider striving for acceptance, navigating the complexities of Hollywood and later the royal family. But the missing pieces, the presence of siblings, their contributions, their conflicts, paint a different, more complicated picture. According to multiple interviews and off-the-record accounts, Meghan's relationship with her brother has been fraught with tension for years. It was not a sudden fracture, but rather a gradual estrangement, a slow cooling of the bond that once existed. Friends, neighbors, and family acquaintances described them as close in childhood, sharing moments that ranged from mischievous adventures to deep emotional connection. And yet, as Meghan's career began to take off, cracks started to appear. Some of these cracks, insiders say, were subtle at first. Misunderstandings over personal choices, conflicting opinions, and disagreements about loyalty and discretion. But as her life became more public, as cameras, interviews, and tabloids documented every move, those subtle fissures widened into chasms. The brother, once an integral witness to her formative years, found himself on the outside, watching someone he knew intimately become a global icon. The key point here is control. Public figures, especially those in the celebrity or royal spheres, spend enormous energy controlling the narrative. Every interview, every anecdote, every public statement is curated to shape perception. And in Meghan's case, the narrative is flawless, meticulously crafted to portray her journey in a particular light: resilience, sophistication, empathy. But what happens when someone who shares your history does not conform to that narrative? This brother, the one she rarely mentions, represents an uncontrolled variable, a person who can challenge, complicate, or contradict the story she presents. And according to him, that has been part of the problem. Over the years, he has watched as his perspective has been ignored or dismissed, his memories replaced by a version of events that he claims is incomplete or misleading. There are reports that he attempted to reach out privately on multiple occasions. Emails, messages, and even in-person attempts to connect were met with silence or polite dismissal. And while family disagreements are normal, what makes this particularly significant is the context. The stakes are enormous. The larger the platform, the more powerful the narrative, and the more dangerous it becomes for an alternative version to emerge. It is this combination of erasure and access that creates tension. Imagine seeing your shared childhood reduced to a footnote in the biography of someone you grew up with. Imagine your voice silenced while the story you helped shape is broadcast to millions. Imagine knowing things that complicate the narrative and being unable to share them publicly without risking legal consequences or public ridicule. Yet, here is the fascinating, critical element. Despite years of silence, he chose to speak. Not in whispers, not in hints, not in background gossip, but in a manner calculated to capture attention, provoke discussion, and, above all, assert presence. The timing is striking. The content is volatile. And the implications are far-reaching. So who exactly is this brother? What shaped his worldview? And how did their shared past evolve into the estrangement we now examine? Born into a blended family navigating the challenges of modern life, Meghan and her brother grew up experiencing both privilege and pressure. Their mother, Doria Ragland, instilled discipline, empathy, and resilience. Their father, Thomas Markle, provided a complex mixture of support, criticism, and expectation. Against this backdrop, the siblings learned to navigate both affection and tension. They formed alliances, learned to read each other's moods, and developed a deep, if sometimes contentious, bond. But as Meghan pursued acting, attended prestigious institutions, and eventually entered the global spotlight, that balance shifted. Insiders describe a growing sense of distance. The brother, who once felt central to her life, began to feel sidelined. Simple interactions became charged with tension. Moments that once might have been private and joyful became sources of potential public scrutiny. By the time Meghan married into the royal family, the gulf had widened into an unbridgeable divide. The brother, now an observer, watched as private history transformed into public spectacle. He was not just sidelined. He was, in his words, erased. And yet, resentment alone does not explain the 3 minutes ago statement that would ignite this latest media storm. What motivates someone to break decades of silence in such a precise, explosive way? According to experts in family psychology and public relations, timing in these cases is rarely accidental. When someone who has been excluded chooses to speak publicly, it is often the result of a perfect storm: frustration, perceived injustice, and an opportunity to regain agency in a narrative where they have been systematically denied voice. In this case, the storm was brewing quietly for years. Small grievances accumulated. Private attempts to connect failed. Observations of inconsistencies in the public record fueled dissatisfaction. And when the moment arrived, a moment where Meghan's narrative was under scrutiny, public curiosity was high, and the audience was primed, the brother seized the opportunity. His approach was strategic. The two words, "yacht girl," were carefully chosen. Not as an attack, not as a confession, but as a trigger. The phrase invites curiosity, provokes emotional response, and demands attention without making any definitive claims. It is both incendiary and ambiguous, a masterstroke in the art of implication. And yet, this is only the beginning. Understanding the brother's motivations, his relationship with Meghan, and the context of his silence is essential to interpreting the broader story. Because what he reveals, or implies, cannot be fully understood without grasping the personal history that shaped him and his sister. Their shared childhood, the bonds and the fractures, the moments of care and the moments of conflict, all of this matters. It frames the lens through which the audience must view the allegations. It provides a narrative foundation that transforms gossip into a story of human complexity, ambition, and estrangement. So, as we move forward, keep this in mind. The brother she never mentions is not just a footnote. He is a key witness to history, a participant in formative moments, and, for reasons that will soon become clear, a voice that refuses to remain silent any longer. Because when someone who has been erased chooses to speak, the story changes. Not necessarily because they are right or wrong or even credible, but because they exist as a living contradiction to the polished narrative. And contradictions, as we know, are magnetic. They demand attention. They invite speculation. They create tension. The brother she never mentions is more than a character in a family drama. He is the catalyst that forces us to question, to doubt, and to reconsider. And in this story, that is exactly what is about to happen. Imagine this. The world is scrolling. Headlines flash across screens. Twitter feeds are scrolling faster than most people can read. Instagram stories disappear in seconds. And then, out of nowhere, a statement drops. One line, 2 words, a casual timestamp. 3 minutes ago. That's all it took to ignite curiosity, outrage, and speculation. 3 minutes. Not 3 hours. Not yesterday. Not during some forgotten media cycle. 3 minutes ago. The immediacy of the timestamp creates urgency. It feels live. It feels current. It feels explosive. And the person behind it? Meghan Markle's brother. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't a carefully mediated interview. It wasn't a staged appearance or a carefully vetted media moment. It was raw, unscripted, and perfectly timed. The choice of timing is critical. In media psychology, immediacy matters. A story labeled as recent or breaking triggers attention, curiosity, and dopamine spikes in audiences. It makes the content feel relevant, urgent, and almost impossible to ignore. And that's exactly what this statement achieved. Within moments, social media accounts, gossip blogs, and news aggregators were scrambling to cover it. Comments exploded, threads were created, and the rumor mill shifted into overdrive. But why now? Why after years of silence? What prompted a brother who had been absent from public discourse to suddenly choose this exact moment? To understand, we have to examine the context. Meghan Markle has been navigating public scrutiny for over a decade. Her early Hollywood career was scrutinized for roles, relationships, and lifestyle. Her later royal engagement brought global attention, intense media focus, and public fascination with her every move. And during this time, the narrative was meticulously controlled. Every interview, every appearance, every public statement was part of a carefully constructed story. From the outside, It may seem as though her brother was merely a footnote, or worse, a shadow erased entirely. But for him, every headline, every curated story, every media portrayal of his sister felt like a distortion of reality. Over the years, he reportedly reached out privately, attempted subtle interventions, and even tried to engage family intermediaries. But his efforts were ignored or deflected. Then came the moment that changed everything. 3 minutes ago. The timing is no accident. Experts in media and family dynamics agree that people who have been silenced often wait for the precise moment when they feel the narrative is vulnerable. They wait until curiosity peaks, the audience is primed, and the platform exists for their voice to resonate. And in the age of instant digital news, that moment can arrive in seconds. This was a strategic disruption, not a random outburst, not a late-night rant, a calculated insertion into the narrative. And the result was immediate. People began asking, why now? Why this phrasing? Why this detail? And that phrasing, the infamous 2 words, was chosen with precision. Yacht girl. 2 words that carry decades of social and cultural weight. 2 words that ignite curiosity, suspicion, and judgment simultaneously. 2 words that signal insider knowledge, insinuation, and controversy without making any concrete claims. Consider this. In the world of celebrity culture, a phrase like yacht girl can create a mental image instantly. People fill in the blanks themselves, projecting assumptions, biases, and judgments onto those words. And the ambiguity ensures that discussion is endless. There is no definitive yes or no, no immediate fact check, only speculation, debate, and intrigue. Now, let's talk about why this matters beyond the clickbait. When someone speaks out of a previously silenced position, the story is no longer controlled by publicists or media strategists. It moves from curated narrative to human drama. And in this case, the human drama is amplified by family dynamics, estrangement, and unresolved tension. According to observers, the brothers' choice of platform and phrasing indicates awareness of media psychology. He knew that making a statement with immediate, time-stamped visibility would maximize impact. He knew the phrase, yacht girl, would ignite curiosity, and he knew that the combination would make it almost impossible for the public to ignore, interpret neutrally, or dismiss entirely. But the timing also introduces an emotional layer. The immediacy of 3 minutes ago signals urgency, frustration, and raw emotion. It suggests someone who is no longer willing to wait, remain silent, or let the narrative unfold without their input. There's power in that. Power in breaking silence. Power in disrupting expectation. And power in forcing people to reconsider what they think they know. Yet, the timing alone doesn't explain the weight of what was implied. To understand the gravity, we must consider the world Meghan allegedly navigated, the circles she moved in, the events she attended, and the lifestyle she was exposed to before public attention amplified her name. The brothers' statement hints at access, social maneuvering, and lifestyle choices that were previously unknown or underreported. The reaction was predictable. Social media buzzed with speculation. Media outlets scrambled for context, fact-checking, and commentary. Fans and critics alike rushed to interpret the statement according to their biases. The viral spread was instantaneous. Within minutes, the 3 minutes ago timestamp became a symbol, not just of immediacy, but of narrative disruption. Experts suggest this is a textbook example of modern media manipulation, or perhaps simply human instinct. People who have been silenced wait for a moment when the world is paying attention and when the narrative is ready to be challenged. The digital age makes this possible like never before. One post, one phrase, one timestamp can create a ripple that travels across platforms, geographies, and communities almost instantly. But the crucial element here is what comes next. The detail that follows the incendiary phrase. Because while yacht girl is enough to capture attention, it is the subtle, almost casual revelation afterward that creates lasting impact. The statement is carefully crafted, the timing excites curiosity, the phrase provokes speculation, and the detail invites interpretation. What was that detail? Why was it significant? And why did it create an almost instantaneous media frenzy? We'll get to that, but first, consider the psychology at play. A sibling speaking out after decades of silence introduces both credibility and controversy. Credibility, because they were there. They witnessed events firsthand. Controversy, because their perspective may contradict the public narrative. And audiences sense that tension immediately. There is something magnetic about a voice that has been excluded suddenly claiming space in the narrative. It forces engagement. It triggers judgment. It inspires curiosity. It generates debate. In short, the 3 minutes ago statement was not just a timestamp. It was a signal, a declaration, a challenge, a disruption of the story the public thought it knew. And in the context of family dynamics, fame, and public scrutiny, it is profoundly significant. But here's the twist that many missed. While the phrasing and timing created attention, the real story is contained in the subtext, in the pauses, in the implications, in the context surrounding those two words. The brother's statement does not exist in isolation. It is part of a continuum of silence, estrangement, and personal grievance. Understanding that continuum is critical. It provides insight into not only the statement itself, but the forces that compelled it, the emotional stakes behind it, and the potential consequences for everyone involved. So, as we move forward, keep in mind, the 3 minutes ago moment is more than just a timestamp. It is a disruption of narrative, a spark in a combustible environment, and a strategic assertion of voice from someone who had been erased. And what follows, both the alleged detail and the fallout, is what makes this story impossible to ignore. 2 words. That's all it took. 2 words dropped into a digital world already primed for controversy, curiosity, and click-driven chaos. Yacht Girl. If you've been anywhere near social media, you know what happened next. Comments exploded. Threads multiplied. Memes were created. The phrase ricocheted across platforms like a live wire, electrifying audiences with equal parts fascination, judgment, and disbelief. But what made those 2 words so explosive? Why did Yacht Girl resonate far beyond casual gossip and immediately dominate conversation? Let's unpack it. First, consider the cultural context. The term carries decades of social and aspirational connotations. In elite and celebrity circles, yachts are symbols of wealth, power, and exclusivity. To be a yacht girl is not just to attend parties on a floating vessel. It implies access to a lifestyle that is glamorous, high stakes, and often shrouded in secrecy. The implication is intimate proximity to privilege, sometimes beyond the reach of fame or inherited wealth. And therein lies the spark. People are fascinated by access. People are fascinated by the doors you can open, the networks you can navigate, and the inner circles you can enter. When someone casually drops a phrase like yacht girl in relation to Meghan Markle, a woman already at the intersection of fame, royalty, and celebrity, it lights a fuse. It raises questions, invites speculation, and, crucially, creates a narrative gap in the audience's mind. The human brain craves closure. When it encounters ambiguity, it seeks to fill in the blanks. And the blanks here are tantalizing. What does yacht girl mean in Meghan's context? Which events? Which circles? Which people? The statement offers no answers, only possibilities. And audiences, left to their own devices, begin to construct their own interpretations. Some assume scandal. Some assume privilege. Some assume manipulation. All assume drama. But the brilliance of the phrase lies in its ambiguity. It implies something without asserting it outright. That's why the internet erupted. The statement is simultaneously provocative and defensible. It allows the speaker to claim insider knowledge without committing to specifics that could be legally or publicly damaging. And it forces everyone else to interpret, speculate, and amplify. Now, consider the delivery. Timing matters, phrasing matters, but context amplifies it. The brother didn't release this phrase in isolation. It followed decades of estrangement, silence, and observation. He wasn't a casual observer. He was a participant in shared history. That makes the phrase credible in the eyes of many. If he was there, the audience thinks he might know things we don't. The phrase also carries an emotional punch. Beyond the gossip and speculation, there's a subtext of judgment, envy, or even resentment. The brother is not just hinting at a lifestyle. He's signaling that he watched, understood, and felt excluded from this world. That emotional undertone resonates because audiences instinctively sense authenticity in anger, regret, or exasperation. And in this case, the emotional resonance is amplified by the familial relationship. Family allegations, after all, hit differently. There is a tension and a moral weight that outsiders cannot replicate. When a sibling speaks, audiences instinctively pay more attention. There's an implied credibility, a sense of intimacy, and a dramatic tension that the public cannot ignore. But the public reaction was only the beginning. The phrase spread so quickly because it is sensational, culturally loaded, and emotionally charged. It is a perfect storm for virality. People began debating what it meant, creating theories, and cross-referencing past events in Meghan's life. Suddenly, a phrase meant to provoke curiosity became a cultural Rorschach test. Everyone projected their assumptions onto it. And yet, here's where nuance is critical. This phrase is not proof of behavior, character, or intention. It is implication, suggestion, a tease. It is deliberately crafted to create questions, tension, and speculation without offering concrete evidence. That's why it is so effective. It invites engagement, but shields the speaker from immediate verification or challenge. Consider the psychology of this approach. Experts in media, communication, and celebrity culture agree. Ambiguity is a powerful tool. It generates discussion, encourages sharing, and keeps attention focused on the speaker and their statement. It also creates a dynamic where audiences are forced to interpret, analyze, and debate. And in a world where attention equals influence, that dynamic is invaluable. But there's more. The phrase, yacht girl, also carries subtle implications about power, gender, and social hierarchy. It suggests proximity to elite circles, insinuates strategic social positioning, and hints at a world where influence can be as valuable as talent. It implies observation, participation, and sometimes manipulation of high-stakes social networks. And when audiences perceive that someone has operated within such a world, curiosity spikes. People want to know more, fill in the blanks, and understand the narrative they think they missed. And that's exactly what happened here. Social media users scoured interviews, events, and public appearances for evidence, context, or confirmation. Analysts and commentators debated motive, timing, and credibility. Even casual viewers found themselves obsessed with reconstructing the implications behind two simple words. The phrase also raises questions about narrative control. Meghan's public image has long been carefully managed. Interviews, appearances, and memoirs have constructed a story of resilience, sophistication, and self-determination. But the introduction of Yacht Girl from a sibling disrupts that carefully curated narrative. It is a reminder that there are alternative perspectives, messy realities, and unspoken chapters. And the genius of this disruption is its subtlety. The brother did not provide names, dates, or photographs. He offered implication and context, enough to provoke curiosity, but not enough to verify. In doing so, he seized narrative power from silence. He forced audiences to ask questions he may never answer. And he created a story that persists precisely because it cannot be fully resolved. But the most significant element lies in what came after. The phrase itself sparked attention, but it was the detail that followed that elevated the statement from provocative to potentially transformative. That detail hinted at specific circumstances, social circles, and moments in Meghan's life that were previously unknown, unexamined, or deliberately obscured. It is important to note that even this detail, carefully chosen, does not constitute proof. It is allegation, interpretation, and suggestion. But in the context of estranged family dynamics, public curiosity, and a meticulously curated public image, the detail gains extraordinary weight. Because the human brain cannot ignore narrative tension, it craves resolution, explanation, and closure. When faced with implication and ambiguity, the audience fills in the gaps. They project assumptions, create scenarios, and debate endlessly. And that is precisely what makes the Yacht Girl phrase so effective, so viral, and so unforgettable. This moment demonstrates the intersection of personal grievance, media strategy, and audience psychology. It shows how two words, dropped strategically and ambiguously, can ignite global conversation. It underscores the power of timing, phrasing, and relational context in shaping public perception. And it sets the stage for the next revelation, the detail that truly altered the narrative. While Yacht Girl captured attention, the detail that followed is what makes the story impossible to ignore. It hints at lifestyle, access, and proximity in ways that challenge assumptions, provoke questions, and, in some interpretations, reshape the story we thought we knew about Meghan Markle. If you thought the phrase "Yacht Girl" was enough to capture attention, you're about to see why it only scratched the surface. Because what followed those two words was a detail so precise, so pointed, and so provocative that it instantly transformed casual curiosity into full-blown obsession. And it wasn't just the detail itself, it was what it implied about timing, connections, and context that made the world stop scrolling. The brother didn't just allude to parties, yachts, or luxury. He hinted at something far more personal: the specific circles she allegedly moved in before the world knew her name. Think less celebrity gossip, more social architecture. The kind of environment where influence, access, and proximity are as valuable as talent, and often more carefully curated than most people realize. The beauty, or danger, of this detail lies in its ambiguity. It doesn't name names, it doesn't provide dates, and it doesn't claim wrongdoing. Instead, it evokes scenarios, networks, and possibilities that are at once tantalizing and terrifying to the public imagination. It's the perfect cocktail for viral speculation. Let's break it down. In the words of observers close to the family, the brother described situations that implied her presence in elite social spheres with people who were not only influential but also mysterious, sometimes controversial, and occasionally untouchable in public discourse. He suggested proximity to power in ways that ordinary observers might never have suspected, situations where a casual observer might assume she was simply a guest, but insiders might recognize as far more strategically positioned. Consider the implications. To be in these spaces isn't just about attending a party. It's about access to decision-makers, social capital, and networks that can accelerate career, reputation, and influence. The claim subtly suggests that Meghan's rise was not only about talent or opportunity. It was also about where she was, who she knew, and how she navigated those worlds before she became a public figure. But here's where the emotional spike comes in. This is not simply a statement about opportunity. It is a reminder of exclusion, betrayal, and estrangement. The brother's phrasing implies that he witnessed these moments, yet was deliberately left out or erased from that narrative. Imagine watching someone you grew up with operate in spaces you couldn't access, and realizing that public narratives erase your presence and perspective. The emotional weight is palpable, and audiences instinctively sense that authenticity in the cadence of his words. Then there's the contradiction. Meghan's public narrative emphasizes resilience, self-determination, and a careful crafting of her own path. Yet, the brother's detail hints at a background in which access, proximity, and insider circles may have played a role in her rise, nuances that complicate the straightforward story. And human psychology responds strongly to contradiction. People cannot help but ask, what really happened? Which version is closer to the truth? And what does this mean about her journey? From a media standpoint, this is genius. The detail is specific enough to suggest insider knowledge, but ambiguous enough to be defensible. It invites discussion without providing proof. It challenges assumptions without making claims that can be directly disproven. And it sets the stage for speculation, debate, and endless replay in social feeds and commentary threads. What makes this even more compelling is timing. The statement was released at a moment when Meghan's public narrative was already under scrutiny, an intersection of fame, controversy, and public fascination. By choosing this moment, the brother ensured that the detail would not exist in a vacuum. It would interact with ongoing narratives, amplify pre-existing debates, and insert him directly into conversations about legacy, fame, and credibility. And yet, the detail is more than just strategy, it is personal. Observers note that the brother's account reflects more than curiosity about her rise. It reflects grievance. It reflects the observation of privilege and access while being excluded. It reflects decades of estrangement and the frustration of watching a shared past become public history without his voice. That emotional undertone resonates with audiences because it is both human and relatable. Even if viewers have never experienced global fame, the feeling of being sidelined, erased, or overlooked in your own family is universally understandable. But here's where the narrative tension escalates. The detail, while indirect, raises questions that are impossible to ignore. Which events? Which social circles? Which networks? How did these experiences influence her trajectory? And most importantly, why has this been hidden, or at least unacknowledged, for so long? Audiences naturally attempt to fill in these gaps. Social media theorists and fans begin cross-referencing appearances, interviews, and public events, trying to map the potential locations, parties, or associations being referenced. Suddenly, the detail is no longer just a piece of gossip. It becomes a puzzle, an intellectual exercise, and a conversation starter that spans continents and social networks. But let's return to the emotional dimension. Beyond curiosity and speculation, the detail introduces moral and ethical undertones. Viewers begin to ask themselves, does proximity to privilege diminish authenticity? Does access to elite networks undermine resilience? Can personal ambition coexist with strategic positioning without raising questions of morality? And while these questions are subjective, their presence intensifies engagement. People are not merely curious, they are emotionally invested. It is worth noting that this detail is delivered not as accusation, but as implication. That subtlety is critical. In communication strategy, implication often carries more weight than assertion. It allows the audience to become co-creators of the narrative, drawing their own conclusions and filling in the blanks with imagination, assumptions, and bias. And that creates engagement far stronger than a statement that can be easily confirmed or denied. At the same time, this detail cannot be ignored because it exists at the intersection of family, fame, and credibility. Siblings carry an inherent authority in discussing shared history. Even if estranged or biased, their perspective resonates in ways that outsiders cannot. And that resonance amplifies the perceived significance of the detail. Audiences instinctively weigh the brothers' proximity to the story, the emotional charge of estrangement, and the timing of disclosure, producing an irresistible tension that keeps people glued to the narrative. And now consider the ripple effect. Once this detail entered public discourse, it could not be contained. Every conversation, comment, and analysis becomes intertwined with speculation, interpretation, and judgment. News outlets reference it cautiously, commentators debate motive, and fans dissect meaning. The narrative spreads and mutates, creating a feedback loop where curiosity and outrage feed one another. This is why the detail is not just shocking, it is transformative. It does not confirm wrongdoing. It does not provide proof. But it disrupts the story we thought we knew, adds layers of complexity to the narrative, and forces audiences to confront ambiguity, contradiction, and family dynamics in ways they were not prepared for. And, most importantly, it raises the stakes for the next chapter. Because while Yacht Girl captured attention and the detail adds context, what comes after, examining broader networks, industry dynamics, and strategic access, begins to illustrate a pattern. A pattern that could reshape how people perceive not just Meghan's rise, but the forces at play behind the scenes of celebrity, privilege, and ambition. So, as we continue, remember, this detail is both a revelation and a question mark. It provides hints without closure, evidence without proof, and narrative tension without resolution. And in the hands of someone who has been excluded for years, that is power, that is influence, that is control over the story that others thought they owned. Hollywood is a world built on connections. Talent is only part of the equation. Timing is crucial. Luck matters. But the hidden ingredient, often unspoken, is access. Access to people, places, and opportunities that the general public rarely sees. And when you combine talent with access, doors swing open in ways that can alter the trajectory of a life. That is the environment Meghan Markle allegedly navigated long before the world knew her name. To understand the significance of the brothers' revelation, we have to step back and look at Hollywood as a machine. It's a glittering, seductive, high-stakes ecosystem where networking isn't just social, it's survival. Parties, galas, film festivals, and even casual social gatherings serve as pipelines to opportunity. They are arenas where introductions matter more than resumes, where being seen with the right person at the right moment can accelerate a career exponentially. Now, consider what it means when a sibling hints at participation in that world before public recognition. The brothers' yacht girl phrasing implies a proximity that most outsiders would never have. It's not about casually attending events. It's about being positioned strategically, moving in circles where influence is currency and relationships can become leverage. Hollywood insiders will tell you, access is everything. A single introduction can lead to a role that changes your career. Being noticed by the right director or producer at the right time can be the difference between obscurity and stardom. And those with social savvy understand how to navigate the subtle currents of power without drawing negative attention. The ability to enter a room, read the dynamics, and position oneself advantageously is as valuable as talent itself. This is why the brothers' claim is so intriguing. By referencing this world, he is suggesting that Meghan had not only the ambition but also the social intelligence to move within elite networks. It complicates the narrative of the self-made, isolated outsider. It hints at someone who understood the mechanics of access and opportunity and could leverage connections in ways that most people could not. But let's pause for a moment. This is not a moral judgment. It is not an accusation of wrongdoing. Access is not inherently unethical. Knowing influential people, attending exclusive events, and navigating elite networks are normal parts of professional growth in high-stakes industries. The question is context: who she was interacting with, how those interactions were perceived, and how those moments were later interpreted by family, media, and the public. That context is critical because it introduces complexity. For the brother, these glimpses into Hollywood were not just professional observations, they were emotional. Watching someone you grew up with navigate a world you were excluded from is a potent mix of pride, envy, and frustration. The human mind reacts to exclusion powerfully, especially when it intersects with ambition and recognition. And that reaction likely fueled the decision to speak publicly after years of silence. Now, let's examine the mechanics of networking in Hollywood. Relationships are often transactional, but they are also performative. Attending events, posing for photos, exchanging pleasantries, and demonstrating charm are all part of the calculus. Being noticed is a skill, and those who master it often accelerate their careers. But mastering it also requires observation, intelligence, and timing, qualities that the brothers' statement implicitly attributes to Meghan. The interesting tension arises when you compare this with her public narrative. Meghan has consistently emphasized merit, hard work, and resilience as the drivers of her success. And while that is undoubtedly true to some degree, the brothers' statement introduces an alternate lens, one in which social positioning, strategic presence, and access played a measurable role. This doesn't negate talent. It simply complicates the story, forcing audiences to consider multiple dimensions of influence and advantage. There's also an emotional layer that cannot be ignored. Hollywood is glamorous, yes, but it is also cutthroat. Access can be fleeting. Alliances shift. Trust is fragile. And when someone is navigating that environment while simultaneously being excluded from family validation or recognition, the emotional stakes are immense. The brothers' account hints at awareness of these stakes and a perception that he was left outside the inner circle, observing rather than participating. That sense of exclusion amplifies the tension in his narrative, making his eventual disclosure all the more potent. Let's take a closer look at the phrase yacht girl in this context. In Hollywood, yachts are not just vehicles, they are stages. They are spaces where social hierarchies are performed, alliances are negotiated, and reputations are shaped. Attending such events is about visibility, positioning, and signaling. Being noticed, or not, can have long-term consequences. The brothers' implication, therefore, is that Meghan was operating in these high-stakes environments with sophistication, awareness, and strategic intent. The intrigue deepens when we consider the ripple effects. Observers, commentators, and fans began to map potential events, circles, and relationships, trying to reconstruct her trajectory. The speculation extends beyond social curiosity. It touches on power dynamics, gendered perceptions of ambition, and the ways in which access can be interpreted or misinterpreted. Every new interpretation adds another layer to the narrative, creating a feedback loop of curiosity, debate, and engagement. From a psychological perspective, the brothers' disclosure leverages several key dynamics. First, there's credibility. As a family member, he has insider knowledge. Second, there's exclusivity. The information is not widely available, creating a sense of privilege in the audience who encounters it. Third, there's ambiguity. The detail is suggestive but not definitive, compelling viewers to fill in the gaps themselves. Together, these elements create maximum engagement and retention, a perfect storm in digital storytelling. Now, imagine being in Meghan's position. Publicly, she must navigate the expectations of audiences, media scrutiny, and family dynamics simultaneously. Privately, she contends with estranged relatives, selective disclosures, and historical truths that may never align neatly with her narrative. The brothers' statement does not simply challenge a story. It introduces tension that cannot be ignored, creating pressure both on public perception and personal relationships. And yet, the genius of this disclosure is subtle. By hinting rather than asserting, by implying rather than proving, the brother maintains plausible deniability while simultaneously forcing audiences to question the official narrative. This duality, powerful yet defensible, is what makes the statement so effective, emotionally charged, and impossible to dismiss outright. Finally, consider the broader lesson about Hollywood itself. Access matters. Connections matter. Strategic presence matters. And the brothers' statement reminds us that careers, influence, and recognition are rarely linear or solely merit-based. They are shaped by observation, positioning, and the ability to navigate complex social environments. That is the reality he is hinting at, and it is a perspective that complicates the simple, inspirational story many have been told. Every family has its hidden stories. Every family has moments that never make it into the public eye. But when you add fame, fortune, and relentless media scrutiny to the mix, those hidden stories acquire a magnified significance. They carry weight not just for the family members involved, but for millions of people observing, judging, and speculating from afar. And in the case of Meghan Markle, one of the most potent forces behind her narrative has been estrangement, specifically, the estrangement from her brother. Estrangement is not a sudden fracture. It rarely happens overnight. It is a slow, often painful process of disconnect. Relationships that once thrived on shared memories, loyalty, and intimacy begin to crack under stress, differing priorities, or unmet expectations. Over time, small disagreements compound, communication falters, and distance grows. Eventually, silence becomes the default, and silence, as we know, can be more powerful than words. In Meghan's story, insiders suggest that this estrangement has been decades in the making. Childhood bonds that once felt unbreakable were gradually eroded by a combination of personal ambition, differing perspectives, and the pressures of fame. By the time she achieved global recognition, the sibling relationship had cooled into a chasm, leaving both parties observing from opposite sides. One moving into the spotlight, the other left in its shadow. This distance creates tension. Imagine living with the knowledge of shared history, of moments that shaped who you both became, yet finding yourself excluded from the story that is now broadcast to millions. Every interview, every profile, every memoir becomes a reminder that your perspective has been marginalized. The emotional weight is profound. Feelings of invisibility, frustration, and even betrayal can accumulate, intensifying over years. And that's the context in which the 3 minutes ago statement emerged. The brothers' decision to speak publicly was not made lightly. It reflects decades of unspoken truths, suppressed grievances, and a desire to assert a voice that had been systematically sidelined. In many ways, this is the psychology of estrangement. The longer the silence, the more charged the eventual disclosure becomes. Estrangement also introduces ambiguity. Observers cannot fully know the private dynamics between siblings, and the absence of first-hand context leaves room for speculation. People naturally ask, why did they drift apart? Who is at fault? And most importantly, how does this tension influence public statements? In this case, the estrangement amplifies the perceived credibility of the brothers' revelation. He is not just a commentator. He is a witness to history who has been deliberately excluded from the narrative. Moreover, estrangement intersects with public perception in complex ways. Meghan's carefully crafted image emphasizes resilience, independence, and emotional intelligence. But the existence of estranged siblings adds layers of contradiction. Public audiences are drawn to these contradictions because they humanize the celebrity. They reveal that behind curated narratives, there are messy, painful realities. And human beings are wired to pay attention to complexity, especially when it challenges the simplicity of a polished story. Now, consider the emotional stakes for the brother. Observers suggest that his silence over the years was not simply acquiescence, but a strategic choice shaped by fear, frustration, and the anticipation of consequences. Speaking out prematurely could have jeopardized relationships, attracted backlash, or been dismissed as vindictive, but remaining silent carried its own psychological burden. The accumulation of unspoken truths, the feeling of being erased, and the growing frustration of watching a shared history distorted in the public eye. When the moment arrived, the choice to speak was both cathartic and strategic. By asserting his voice with precision, via the yacht girl phrasing and the revealing detail, he simultaneously reclaimed agency and ensured maximum impact. This is a classic pattern in estranged sibling dynamics. Decades of silence can lead to a highly charged, carefully calculated disclosure that disrupts narratives and commands attention. Estrangement also magnifies the audience's emotional response. Observers are drawn to the story not just because of the alleged content, but because of the human drama underlying it. Family conflict, long-standing resentment, and the unspoken truths of childhood evoke empathy, curiosity, and judgment. Viewers find themselves emotionally invested in reconstructing a family dynamic they were never part of, creating engagement that extends far beyond the original revelation. Another key element is perspective. Estranged siblings often see the family differently than those in the spotlight. They witness moments, dynamics, and contradictions that remain hidden from public view. In this case, the brother's statement hints at insights into Meghan's pre-fame life, her social maneuvering, and the experiences that shaped her trajectory. These insights are compelling precisely because they challenge the audience's assumptions. They offer a window into a world the public has been conditioned to perceive as polished, linear, and controlled. Estrangement also raises questions about motive. Critics might argue that the brother is biased, resentful, or seeking attention. And they may be correct, at least partially. But bias does not negate knowledge. Estrangement intensifies perspective, and with intensity comes emotional truth. Even if the lens is tinted by frustration, the observations themselves can hold significant weight, particularly when they align with broader patterns of behavior, timing, and social dynamics. The psychological tension in this chapter is essential to understanding why audiences are riveted. Estrangement adds stakes, complexity, and moral ambiguity. It transforms what could be a simple allegation into a multi-layered story about family, identity, and the long-term consequences of silence. It forces viewers to grapple not just with the words "yacht girl" or the brother's detail, but with the underlying narrative of exclusion, observation, and reclamation of voice. And here's the critical insight. Estrangement is not static. It evolves. Relationships may remain frozen in tension for decades, only to be reshaped by moments of disclosure, revelation, or confrontation. In this case, the 3 minutes ago statement represents one such moment, a rupture in the silence that may never be fully resolved. It forces both parties, as well as the public, to confront histories that were long ignored, distorted, or suppressed. Finally, consider the broader implication. Estrangement, silence, and revelation are not unique to celebrities. They are universal human experiences. Yet, in the context of fame and public scrutiny, these dynamics acquire heightened significance. They illustrate how personal history intersects with narrative control, media perception, and public fascination. They show how a single voice, long silenced, can alter perceptions, spark debate, and inject complexity into a story that many assumed they understood. There is a pattern to influence, fame, and opportunity. a web of connections that rarely makes it into public narratives. These are not just casual acquaintances or fleeting encounters. They are relationships that shape decisions, open doors, and provide insider access. In Meghan Markle's story, the brothers' statement hints at precisely these hidden connections, the kind that are invisible to the general public but profoundly consequential behind the scenes. Think of it as an invisible map. On the surface, everyone sees a linear trajectory. Hollywood roles, media appearances, and eventually, global recognition through royal engagement. But underneath, there exists a lattice of social positioning, strategic interactions, and cultivated relationships that quietly accelerate opportunity. And according to the brother, Meghan's life intersected with this lattice long before she became a public figure. This is what makes the Yacht Girl reference so compelling. It isn't just about attending exclusive events. It's about proximity to people whose influence can shape career paths, public perception, and social credibility. It's about moving in spaces where introductions matter as much as talent, where being seen by the right person at the right time can set the trajectory for a lifetime. Hollywood insiders describe these networks as both delicate and powerful. Relationships can be as fleeting as they are consequential. Being in the right place at the right time requires awareness, intuition, and a subtle understanding of social dynamics. One misstep, one misread signal, and an opportunity evaporates. The brothers' revelation suggests that Meghan had the acumen to navigate these spaces effectively, a fact that complicates the simplified narrative of struggle and outsider ambition. But there is another layer, the emotional dynamics of these hidden connections. From the brothers' perspective, observing someone close navigating high-stakes networks while being excluded from the circle is a source of profound tension. Imagine knowing the rules of the game, witnessing their mastery, yet being barred from participation. That tension builds quietly over years, simmering beneath the surface, until it erupts in moments of revelation. The 3 minutes ago disclosure is precisely that eruption. A release of accumulated frustration, curiosity, and the need for acknowledgement. By highlighting Meghan's alleged presence in these hidden networks, the brother asserts authority over the narrative and forces the audience to reconsider what they thought they knew about her trajectory.